Hello everybody, welcome to our Supporting Young People Who Self-Harm webinar. My name is Vicki Dunham, I'm Practice Development Lead, I work at Boingboing. My background is in CAMS, working with young people with mental health difficulties.
And hello everyone, so I am Louise Brinton-Clarke. I work at Boingboing as co-production coordinator. My background is in adult mental health and substance misuse and working with students with mental health difficulties as well.
So just to talk you through about what we're going to be doing over the next hour or so. So this is the aims and objectives of today's session. We're going to understand what self-harm is, recognise the signs that someone might be self-harming, to know how to broach the subject of self-harm with children, young people, parents and carers, to understand resilience in relation to self-harm, and to build your confidence in supporting young people who self-harm, and also to remember us and how to self-care, how to look after ourselves when we're supporting young people who self-harm. So we understand that self-harm can be an emotive subject. So the first thing is to look after yourself and be aware of anything that might trigger you. This is a pre-recorded film, so you just pause it whenever you need to, get up, have a walk around, get yourself a cup of tea, just do whatever you need to do to keep yourself safe. And also recognising that self-harm can really affect our confidence as practitioners, as school staff, teachers, pastoral workers, really worrying and hoping that we're getting it right for young people, and worrying about our ability and our capability in supporting young people who self-harm. So just take a minute and just think about where you are in your level of confidence now. How confident are you in supporting young people who self-harm? And if you can just think about that now, and then have another look at it at the end of the session to see if you feel more confident.
So, welcome back everybody. We've got a quiz here, so we'll ask you to pause this again now and just have a look at these questions and have a think about them. And when you're thinking about your answers, think about where you may have got those answers from, if there's something that you already think, or if there's something that you may have got from other people. So if you just pause the video now and have a look at the questions, and then we'll run through the answers with you. So welcome back everybody. I hope you've had time to do that and have a think about the answers in this. So Vicki, if you want to start going through each one. So if you talk about self-harm to a young person, this will make them want to self-harm. So this is false. Talking about self-harm is not going to want to make somebody engage in self-harm if they're not already thinking about it. And it's definitely better to address an issue that is not present than not to address an issue that is present. So don't worry that you might put the idea into somebody's head. Research and things like that have shown that that's not the case. So the next question, people who self-harm are doing it for attention. So that's false. So as a society, we've got this notion that attention seeking is a really bad thing. For some people who self-harm, it might be a form of communication or a way to elicit support. But that's not to be seen in a negative way. For many, self-harm is actually a private act, and there's often a lot of shame involved. So the next one, everyone who self-harm wants to end their life. This is also false. Not all people who self-harm want to end their life, but many people who do end their life have self-harm before. And for many people, self-harm is actually a way of preventing them from ending their life, or preventing further harm to themselves. So it can actually, whilst it's not the best coping mechanism, people have reported it actually helps them to stay alive. So the next one, only people who've been abused self-harm. So this is false again. So whilst people who've been abused do have higher rates of self-harm, the two aren't mutually exclusive. It's important to think about if somebody has been abused or if they're showing signs of abuse, but you need to look for those specific signs. And somebody who's self-harming, that doesn't automatically mean that they've been abused. So the next one, people only self-harm because their friends are. Now this is false. Some young people will self-harm in groups or because their friends are, but that doesn't mean somebody will automatically start self-harming because their friends are. There is something in it, so young people will look to their friends for coping strategies, especially in their teenage years. People have lots of emotions going on and there might be difficulties, and they will be looking to their friends to see what coping strategies they are using. And if they see that a friend is self-harming, they might think, oh, well, that works, so then maybe that will work for me and I'll feel a bit better. But again, as the previous question, it's not mutually exclusive. And having a friend who self-harms doesn't automatically mean that somebody is going to self-harm. So the next one, if a person doesn't have cuts, they are not self-harming. So whilst this is the sort of most well-known form of self-harm, when we think of self-harm, that might be what we go to when we're thinking about it. We need to think about other forms as well, because there are so many different methods. And we also need to think about things like overdosing and ligaturant don't automatically mean that somebody wants to end their life. There are lots of different forms of self-harm and they serve lots of different purposes. And I guess I'll just get in here as well that this idea of superficial self-harm, that doesn't minimise the distress that somebody might be experiencing. The next one, people who self-harm have a higher pain threshold. So this is false. For some people who self-harm, the pain is the reason that they do it, especially if they do use cutting as their main form of self-harm. Inducing physical pain can detract from emotional pain. And again, as I've said earlier, this can actually be quite a useful coping mechanism if somebody's got really high levels of distress. And finally, people can overcome self-harm. Of course they can. With the right help and support, non-judgmental approach and open discussions, individuals can learn different and other ways to manage their emotions. So I hope you learned something from that. I hope that was okay. And we go on to the next one. So what is self-harm? So for the purposes of this presentation, we need to distinguish between self-harm and deliberate self-harm, because there is a school of thought that there's lots of different behaviours that are self-harm. So we can say that drinking alcohol is self-harm, or smoking is self-harm, or eating too much is self-harm. For the purposes of this, we're talking about deliberate self-harm. So somebody actively, so say, engaging in cutting behaviours or overdosing or something like that. That's what we're talking about here. And what we've said here, so it can include a variety of different things. This list is not exhaustive. Can include cutting, biting, burning, hitting, scratching, pulling of hair, picking of skin and head banging, use of ligatures, interfering with the healing of an injury and self-poisoning, so things like overdoses and things. And it can range from minor injury to dangerous and life-threatening behaviour. And it's always really important to distinguish if somebody was engaging in an act of self-harm but not wanting to end their life, or if it has been an attempt to end their life, because it can be extremely dangerous. Okay.
So what is self-harm? So self-harm is a behaviour or a symptom. It's not a disorder or an illness. Self-harming behaviour is strongly suggestive of an underlying psychological or emotional problem, but many young people who self-harm do not meet the criteria for specific mental illness diagnosis. So what this quote is saying here is that it's important to understand self-harm as a behaviour or a symptom. It's not the cause, and there might be other underlying causes and self-harm is the symptom, is the behaviour that we see. So I find it useful to think of self-harm as a sign of distress and to kind of remove it from the mental illness. Is it a mental illness or not? It's a young person who self-harm is obviously in distress, and to consider it as distress. And distress can show itself in many forms, and self-harm is just one of the forms. And the distress can be a response to environmental stresses. So, for example, if a young person's being bullied, they might self-harm as a direct result of the bullying, as a coping mechanism to cope with the bullying that they're experiencing. And that indicates their distress rather than a mental illness. Doesn't mean the young person doesn't need any help or support, and finding different ways of managing. And also it's important to look at the underlying causes.
So how common is self-harm? So we've got 36% of 16 to 25-year-olds report to have self-harmed. Hospital admissions for self-harm have doubled over the last 6 years. And there were 181 hospital admissions as a result of self-harm in young people aged 0 to 17. So what the data is showing us as well is that self-harm is increasing in younger ages. For the vast majority of young people, self-harm is a coping strategy intended to help them continue with life, not end it. However, young people who self-harm are at a higher risk of completing suicide than the general population. Some of this may be because they intentionally want to end their life, but there's also the risk of accidental ending their life as well if their self-harm is severe. And this visual here of this sort of iceberg, self-harming in the community, so not presenting to clinical services. So these statistics that we've got are only on people that we know who are self-harming. So the smaller bit, self-harm, presenting to clinical services. And then this tiny bit at the top, suicide. So try not to get too nervous about addressing these issues, because whilst it does happen, it is unusual and it is rare. And this is about trying to prevent it from escalating and getting worse.
Okay, so we just want to kind of think about why young people self-harm. And there's no one reason why young people might self-harm. There might be lots of different reasons why young people self-harm, or a young person might do it for lots of different reasons as well, to meet lots of needs. So the first one is coping with difficult emotions, and the emotion that these are kind of the stresses in life that they might be experiencing, and there might be a multitude of difficult emotions or stresses in life, such as academic pressure, bullying, abuse, example. Another reason why young people might self-harm is to communicate distress. We're not always great. We don't always have the language to be able to talk about or verbalise our distress, or be heard, have our distress heard. And so self-harming might be a mechanism to communicate distress, to feel alive or to feel real. So some young people might feel numb. They might feel as though their emotions are really hidden and kind of deep down. And so to have that fear of a pain, something sharp and something shock, it helps them feel alive, and it helps them feel in the present and have emotion. To enlist help or concern, or to keep people away, it might serve dual mechanisms for different people, or at the same people at different times. Some people, sometimes self-harm might keep people away from you. And other times it might enlist support. It's got different functions. If young people are managing with abuse or trauma, and they have ongoing kind of chronic mental distress, having a physical pain, having a sharp physical pain can remove the focus from the mental distress onto physical pain, which serves a function. Some young people like to see the blood flow. It makes them feel alive. It makes them feel real. some young people, particularly children and young people that have experienced abuse or trauma, might have a difficult relationship with certain body parts, and that might be where they self-harm for the hated body parts. Regain feelings of control. Control is a really important concept, power and control. And if we're feeling out of control and if we're feeling powerless, we might self-harm. To regain control, there is something that we can control. Louise has mentioned before, to prevent more serious harm as suicide. If some young people feel suicidal, self-harming might be enough to control those suicidal thoughts and feelings. To escape, again, that kind of connects to the mental distress, to escape from the mental distress that people might be feeling, or as a punishment. You know, it might be that we feel as though that's what we deserve and it's a way to punish ourselves. So there are lots of different reasons, and this isn't exhaustive. It's individual for individual people. I think the point here is that there are lots of different reasons why a young person self-harms, and they might self-harm for multitude reasons themselves.
So we're going to have a look at stigma now. There's a lot of stigma around self-harm, and whilst there seems to be like more increased awareness, there is still quite a lot of stigma. I think that stigma often comes from misunderstanding. And the problem with stigma is that it will deter young people from seeking help. And as we've spoken about earlier, it's about attention needing and not attention seeking. So I really want you to have a think here. I want you to think about a time that you were in pain or feeling sad. You might want to pause the video at this point just to have a look at these questions. And I want you to have a think about, did you look for support? What support did you look for? Who did you go to? How were you feeling? How did you manage? And then try and transfer that to a young person who's feeling extreme emotional distress. And they might be self-harming in order to elicit support. In that case, it would be their form of communication. They might not have the words. They might not be able to name their emotions, to say what they're feeling. They just know that they feel bad. We all need attention at some point. You know, if we do something well, we might post it on social media to, you know, certainly, you know, when I secured the job at Boingboing, you know, I let everybody know because I wanted people to say well done. If something bad or sad happens, we let people know because we want people to care for us. So as it says at the bottom there, for many people who self-harm, this is their form of communication. What can also happen is that somebody starts self-harming and begins to learn that it can be a form of communication. So whilst that may not be the initial function, it can be that it becomes their form of communication. Because sometimes it's just really hard to find the words, and sometimes it's really hard to describe how you're feeling. So maybe just have a little bit of time to think about perhaps your own thoughts and feelings regarding self-harm, and your ideas around attention seeking. And do you have any judgments there? And just perhaps think about them and maybe challenge yourself a little bit. And I've also got down here as well, because this is quite common, would you compare the severity of an injury? So if you've got a young person who is self-harming badly compared to somebody who's self-harming superficially, it's really important to not compare the levels of distress. The injuries may need a different treatment or outcome, but the levels of distress aren't really comparable. So maybe just take a little bit of time to think about that, because you know it's quite difficult and it's quite challenging. And we're certainly not judging anybody who perhaps hold certain thoughts or beliefs regarding self-harm. This is an educational video, and we just want to sort of have people thinking about these quite difficult things.
Okay, welcome back. I hope everybody's okay. Going to talk a little bit about who's at most of risk of self-harm. So anybody might use self-harm for the different functions that we've talked about, but some young people are more at risk of self-harm than others. And in Boingboing, when we talk about resilience and we talk about the Boingboing approach to resilience, we look at resilience in the context of adversity. And some groups of young people experience more adversity than other groups of young people and might be more marginalised in the community and in society than other young people. So who is at most of risk of self-harm, bearing in mind that anybody might engage in self-harm activities? Young women, evidence shows that young women self-harm more than young men. Prisoners, asylum seekers and veterans. We've talked a little bit before about a reason for self-harm might be to regain power or control. So, it might be young people that are feeling that circumstances put them in a position where they're particularly powerless and have no control. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender young people are far more at risk of self-harm than other young people. And again, if we think about social isolation and judgment and stigma and feeling isolated in the community, that might explain why. Having a friend who self-harms, we've talked before about young people do look to other young people to see how they cope with distress and might copy some of those, might use some of those behaviours, coping strategies that they see. People have experienced abuse during childhood. And again, if we look back to why people self-harm and to manage distress or to ease mental distress, that might explain why. Children living in domestic violence households are more at risk of self-harming. Children in young people in residential care, such as residential children's homes, so it's children that might be looked after by the local authority. Young Asian women are more at risk of self-harm and more at risk of suicide. And children and young people with learning disabilities are more at risk. So we ask you there to use your inequalities imagination to think about groups, young people that you might be in your school, that you might be working with or supporting, that might be more marginalised, might be more isolated in society, might experience more adversities, and to give those young people particular attention and particular kind of support in order to support them to manage, really. So how do we spot the signs and symptoms of self-harming? So if we're working in a school and there might be certain things that we've become aware of that might worry us, and we might kind of lead us to question about whether they're self-harming or not. First one is physical changes. You might see physical changes in a student or a pupil. They might have unexplained cuts or burns or bite marks or bruises. Now, it might not be that you might notice one set of bruises or one set of cuts, but you might see them on a regular basis. Or you might notice that the cuts seem to be a little bit distinguishable from everyday kind of cuts and bruises, in that they might be very neat, or there might be a very kind of clear pattern to them, such as like straight cuts along the kind of forearm. Bald patches. If a young person is pulling the hair out, you might notice they have bald patches. You might notice some bloody tissues in waste bins or in pockets, or that they have with them. Or you might notice them flinching when being physical, to hugging with friends and things like that. So you might notice some physical changes. You might notice some behavioural changes. You might notice that pupils or young people might keep themselves covered up more. They might avoid swimming classes. They might avoid getting changed for PE. They might keep forgetting the PE kit. They might not take their blazer off on a hot sunny day, keep their arms covered. You might notice that they're accessing inappropriate websites, or that they're being quite secretive with the tech use. And you might notice more secretive behaviour. So you might see some behavioural changes. And then there's emotional changes. You might notice that they're more withdrawn than usual or isolated from friends and families. You might notice that they have a low mood, lack of interest, or they might be more angry than usual as well, and have a lower self-esteem. You might notice them blaming themselves for problems or expressing feelings of failure or uselessness or hopelessness. So what you might spot and see with young people is physical changes, behavioural changes and emotional changes, or some of these changes some of the time, enough to make you feel concerned and enough to make you want to explore the issue further. Okay, we're now going to introduce you to the resilience framework. So the resilience framework, if you're familiar with the work of Boingboing and the Boingboing's approach to resilience, you might have seen this framework before, but I'll just talk you through it. So the resilience framework is based on lots and lots of research about what will enable young people and families and anybody to be more resilient. We've split it into 5 columns. So there's basics, belonging, learning, coping, and core self. This isn't in any order. You don't have to look at any column before you look at another. The principle of the resilience framework is that you build on resilient moves where and when you can. All of the resilient moves that are there's 42 resilient moves in total, and they're all based on research about taking a holistic approach to young people's mental health and resilience, and that there's wide systemic things we can put in place to enable children and young people to be resilient. So just to talk you through, so look at the basics column. So basics is having the basics in place. It's having good housing, money to live, it's being safe, having transport to get to places, healthy diet, enough sleep, exercise and fresh air, not being judged, that's being free from prejudice, free from discrimination. So we know that we need the basics in life in order to thrive. And we know that young people and families that don't have the basics, that have adversities regarding financial problems or poor housing, we know that that's stresses that lead to mental health problems. So having the basics in place is really important. The next column is belonging, and belonging is all around about relationships, and it's all about attachments and having those positive relationships in life. So it's about having a place that you belong, and school. We know that school is such a vital community for so many young people, for so many pupils. Spending time with good people in good places. Again, schools are a real position there to be able to enable young people to meet these resilient moves. Having relationships, keeping relationships going, healthy relationships, getting together with people that you can rely on. So the belonging it's about family and it's about parents and carers, but it's wider than that. It's about having people in your community, having people in your life that you can rely on, and school is so important. Predicting good experiences, making friends and mixing with other people. These are all really important resilient moves under the belonging column. Moving on to the next column, which is learning. Now, learning is about school and college, but it's so much more than learning in school and college as well, because we know that not school works well for everybody. So it's making it work as well as possible, no matter what your academic achievements are, no matter what your skills and your talents are. It's just making school work as well as possible. So what can school do to enable pupils, no matter what somebody's academic achievement is, to make school work as well as them? How can we tap into individual talents and individual skills and enable pupils to have a good time in school? Engaging mentors, planning out future, kind of having a sense of a future, having a plan, being organised, highlighting achievements, developing life skills, all really important resilient moves under the learning column. The next one's coping. So coping focuses more on developing coping skills, developing coping strategies, taking a positive outlook in life. We know that anybody who is able to see the positives in life are more likely to have a more positive mental health. Anybody who can exercise being brave, who understands that right from wrong, who's good at problem solving, and these are all skills and techniques that we can learn. Problem solving strategies, Finding time for interests. So it's finding time for things that that energize us, that motivate us, that we're good at. Calming down. So finding strategies to enable us to regulate our emotions, to be able to calm down, to be able to kind of really manage our emotions better. Remembering tomorrow's another day, so putting bad days behind us, moving on, learning from things and moving on from them, and leaning on others when necessary. So enlisting support and leaning on people. And again, school is a really important place where we can build those positive relationships and lean on others for support. And having a laugh. We know that having a laugh is good for our mental health. And the more we're able to laugh, the more resilient we can be. So that's the coping column. And then the final column, but as I say, this doesn't go in any order at all, is core self. And core self is understanding ourselves a little bit deeper. Understanding ourselves, understanding our histories, understanding other people. So having empathy and understanding other people's feelings. It's having hope. Hope is so important, especially for young people that are struggling with their levels of distress and mental health. You know, instilling a sense of hope is a really important resilient move. Taking responsibility for yourself, taking responsibility to work through difficulties, to manage distress, to understand our distress, and to put things in place that might help us. And again, existing help and solutions for problems. So to use existing help and solutions. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the resilient moves. Underneath, we see the noble truths. And the noble truths are kind of principles that underpin the resilient moves. So no matter what resilient moves we might be working on, we've got these principles, which is our approach in how we work on these resilient moves. So accepting is about accepting where we are in our journey, without blame, without shame, accepting what we're capable of, accepting what our limitations are, accepting what the difficulties are, what the challenges might be. So acceptance is a really important noble truth. Conserving is another noble truth. So sometimes we find that when we're trying to make change, or when we're trying to deal with any difficulties we have, we forget to conserve the things that are already going well. We don't pay those attention. We become problem focused, and the resilient framework is very asset focused. We focus on the things that are already going well. And we work to conserve those things. We don't lose sight of our achievements, of the things that are always going well. And no matter what level of distress we have, if we look hard, we'll always be able to find something that's worth conserving, something that's okay. Commitment is a really important noble truth, especially when we're working with young people and families. What can we realistically commit to? Not over-committing and then letting people down, but also sticking with our commitments. If we're in there supporting a young person, then we're there, and changing worker or changing commitments just kind of doesn't fit really with the noble truths. It's been clear about what commitments we can make and then sticking with those commitments. And enlisting, this is the fourth noble truth, which is really important, and it's about not dealing with things on our own. If we're supporting a young person with their self-harm, it's about not having to deal with that on our own, but enlisting support for ourselves, enlisting support for young people, but also enlisting the right support at the right time from the right people. Sometimes we fall into a trap of if a young person's kind of got high levels of distress or there's a high level of need, it's over-enlisting. It's getting all sorts of professionals and services involved at the same time, which isn't always very useful. But we're talking about enlisting the right support at the right time for the right people, for young people, also for ourselves, because we need to, if we're supporting young people with self-harm, we need support as well. So we need to enlist our support. So that's the resilient framework in a nutshell. And now we're going to kind of look at what resilient moves are useful when we're thinking about supporting young people who self-harm. So looking at belonging, looking at the column of belonging, this is a really important one when we're thinking of self-harm, because it's all about relationships. Young people are going to talk to the people that they trust about their distress and about their self-harm. And it might take them a long time to decide who they're going to talk to. It might be that the self-harm has been secretive behaviour for quite a while, and they make a very clear and conscientious decision about who it is that they trust and who it is they'd like to speak to. And they will seek out adults that they feel as though they have positive relationships, that they know and that they trust. And it might be you. It might be anybody working in your school. So be prepared. Be prepared for young people to come and speak with you because they know you and they trust you. And if it is you, the first kind of advice we would give is stay calm. It might be a shock and it might be upsetting information for you, but this young person might have been holding on to that for quite a while. So, and what they want to see is that you can handle it, that you can cope with what they're going to tell you. So no matter how uncalm you might feel, it's really important that you look as though you're staying calm. Show empathy and show care. They've been really brave coming to speak with you, and so give time for that conversation. Make time. Leave what you're doing and make them the sole focus of your attention. Be patient. They might not give you all the information. I'll tell you everything in one go. So be really patient and give it the time that these conversations need. And don't worry about getting it wrong. Sometimes we say the wrong thing. Sometimes we react in the wrong way because we're people too. And that worry can sometimes stop us. And what we do is we don't do anything. And actually what young people say is they would rather that we got it wrong, but we're trying to help than to not help at all. So it might be that it's you that a young person comes to talk to around the self-harm, and because they know you and they trust you. And so having those initial conversations, here's just some pointers really about having those initial conversations around self-harm. Ask open questions. So if you can ask a question, that's where the answer can't be yes or no, but it has to be more open. Tell me more about that. Oh, you've told me that you self-harm. Tell me more about that. Tell me what's going on there. Summarise what you hear being said. Now, the purpose of that is to make sure that you're not mishearing anything, but it also really gives the message that you're listening really carefully. And also, if you've misinterpreted anything, it gives the young person an opportunity to correct you. So just summarise what you hear being said. So this is what I think you've told me. Tell me if I'm wrong with any of this. This is what I think I've heard. Ask how you can help. Ask what it is that they want from you. Now, they might not know how you can help, and it might be a question that you explore together, but what you're giving a message is that you're here to help, and we might not know what the solutions are, but we can work it out together. So what can I do to help? Can you think of anything that would be helpful for you right now? Lots of reassurance. So they're kind of little ums and ahs in between the conversation. Gosh, it must have been really hard for you to come and talk to me today. You're doing really well. You've been really brave talking about this with me today. Silence. Now, we can be really uncomfortable with silence, and my advice is just sit with the silence. That silence is okay, and silence is much, much better than jumping in and feeling as though we've got to fill the gaps in the conversation. Just being. You're just being and you're just listening, and it's okay to listen to silence as well, and give conversations time. The young person might be thinking about the next thing they're going to tell you, so don't interrupt that silence, and just sit comfortably with it. And as you're listening, a trap that we can fall into is thinking about how we're going to reply, thinking about what we're responding, and that's not kind of true listening. So true listening is listening to understand, not to reply. So really listening to everything they're saying and the emotions behind everything they're saying, in order to understand kind of what that young person is trying to communicate to you. So there's some hints and tips about those initial conversations you might have around self-harm. The first thing you might want to think about during those initial conversations is safety. And being safe is clearly, from the resilient framework, that's kind of safety and basics is a really important resilient moves. Be clear about the school's confidential policy from the offset. So as you're getting into a conversation that you need to let that young person feel empowered, that they know what's going to happen to the information that you're going to give them. And you can't promise to be confidential about things where there might be risk. So you just might say, just before we go on, I can see that we're going to have a conversation about this, but let me just tell you a little bit about confidentiality. So what we can talk about, we can keep confidential within the school, unless we know that there's a risk that you or somebody else is not safe, and then we'll be informing people that we know that need to know this. So just to have that conversation really early on. We've talked before about the relationship between self-harm and suicide. And even though young people that self-harm may not be suicidal, it's just important in thinking about safety to check this out within conversations and use clear, simple language to check out thoughts and intentions. We would say use language that can't be misinterpreted. So something, for example, do you not want to be here? That can be misinterpreted. They might not want to be in school. They might not want to live in that area. So it's just being really clear. Do you have any thoughts about killing yourself? Be as clear and as concise as what you possibly can be. If they say yes, now that's not over unusual. Lots of young people might have thoughts, and having thoughts and having plans and intentions are really different. So if they say yes, they are having thoughts, it's just staying calm with that and just exploring it a little bit more. So do you intend to act on the thoughts? Lots of people might have thoughts about killing themselves and have no intention at all to act on them. So it's just, if they answer yes to having thoughts, just checking that out. Do they then have any intentions? And if they say yes again, some people might have thoughts and intentions, but no plans. They're not going to do anything about it. So do you have any plans? And are you safe? Are you safe at the moment? That's a really kind of clear question. Do you feel you can keep yourself safe? So once you've checked out if the young person's got any suicidal thoughts and intentions and plans, don't keep that to yourself. You need to pass that information on. So if a young person's got suicidal thoughts and intentions, then we advise that you speak to your CAM service. And if they've got a plan, then they quite need an urgent assessment with CAMS. So I'll be passing that information on immediately, involving parents and carers as well along the way. So it's checking that out. When we're looking at basics, it's just checking that out. Check if any medical assistance is required. So have they come to you to tell you that they have self-harmed? And if so, is medical assistance required? If somebody's taken any tablets or any overdose or any poisoning, they need to go to the hospital to get that checked out, no matter how many tablets they've taken. Don't you pass a judgment saying, no, it's only so many tablets. If they've taken tablets, then they need to go to the hospital to get checked out. And you just bring that up in conversation very calmly. Let's just see if we need any medical attention for your cuts. Let's just have a little look. They might not want to show you the cuts, but they might say, I'll show the school nurse. So it might be just who can show cuts if needed. Do we need to get that looked at? Do we need to have a little look at your cuts and to see if you need any medical first aid on them? Offer first aid advice. So if there are cuts, it's about, do you know how to look after them? Are you keeping it clean? Are you keeping any wounds clean? And then escalating any risk to the safeguarding lead. So be clear about what your school's policies are and what you escalate. And when you bring parents and carers involved as well, will be down to your safeguarding and down to your confidentiality policies.
Thank you, Vicky. So the next bit on the or part of the resilience framework is coping. So finding other ways to manage distress. Now, it's really important here to think about, so it's not all about distraction. So it's about managing the distress. So we'll go through this now. So support the young person to find other ways to cope with distress. Now, this may be in the form of distraction, but it may also be, so if you remember the noble truths there, maybe accepting that this is how they feel right now, and they've just got to try and ride the wave. Because it's not a bad thing to feel sad or upset or overwhelmed. It's not a bad thing. And I think what we often do is try and move away from that feeling, or it's okay sometimes to sit in that feeling. Help the young person notice the positives in their life. Sometimes it can feel quite difficult if somebody feels like they don't have any positives. You just sort of look around, they might have a pet or a grandparent or a family member, a sibling. They might have friends online, they might do gaming and they've connected with people in gaming. They might have interests and things like that. So just try and help them dig out something positive. And we've got there to keep a gratitude journal. When it's too much, it's okay to encourage to see every day as a new start. So this kind of ties in with the top one. This too shall pass. It will. And we might have to go through the same thing the next day. But again, this too shall pass. Every day is a new start and it's a new opportunity. Encourage time for talents and interests. Sometimes I think when a young person is feeling distressed, that it becomes all-encompassing, and talents and interests can kind of fall by the wayside. It's really important to keep those in their life. What is it they enjoy doing? What is it they're good at? Just helping them to remember what they enjoy doing. Helping them to learn to problem solve. It's really crucial for children and young people to learn these skills, because we take them with them for the rest of our life. So it's not necessarily about, as I said earlier, it's not necessarily about just pushing it to one side and ignoring it. What is it we can do in this moment? Is the self-harm as a result of something that might have a solution? It's not about blame, but this ties in with resilience. What is it we can do in this moment? Finding ways to keep calm. So there's lots of different techniques, and a lot of people will have heard of some of these by now, because they're sort of quite like on social media and things like that. So mindfulness. So mindfulness doesn't necessarily there's lots of different ways to be mindful. We can eat our food mindfully. We can go for a walk mindfully. It doesn't necessarily you don't have to sit there and be consciously mindful, if that makes sense. There's relaxation techniques. So it's making sure we're aware of ourselves, deep breathing, counting to 10, counting backwards from 10. There's also grounding techniques, so just making sure things like their feet are on the ground, they're aware of the body, they're aware of where they are in time and space, they are here. Then you've got your distraction techniques. So distraction techniques are really useful, but they shouldn't be constantly used. If somebody's having to constantly use them, what will happen is the power will be taken out of them. So distraction techniques can come in any shape or form. I think the most common one we go to is, say, colouring. Colouring is not for everybody. It might be gaming, it might be going for a walk, it might be cooking, it could be anything, but it shouldn't constantly be go to a distraction technique, because the power is taken away from the distraction technique then, and then they stop working. And identify what other support would be helpful. Is there somebody they can talk to? Is there a helpline? There's things like Childline and things like that. They have web chats and things. These are all really important ways of coping, and some of them can be really simple, but they can be really, really powerful. So there's this idea of a self-soothe box, and whilst some people might think that's not for them, you can have anything in a self-soothe box. So we'll just run through the list and then maybe have a think about what you'd have in your own self-soothe box, just as a practice to try and get into the shoes of a young person. And these can actually be helpful for anyone. I have my own self-soothe box. So things like lavender oils and perfume. Lavender oil is really good for calming. Different smells. Smells that might remind you of something or remind a young person of something pleasant. Hand cream, there's something really soothing about just rubbing in the hand cream, and it's a form of self-care as well. The chili powder and the lemon juice, they're quite they're pungent, they're strong, they jolt us back. So we could either like smell it or just like put a dab of chili powder on our tongue. That is going to change your state because it's going to move your attention. Marker pens, if you just sort of want to, if the young person just wants to write something. Lots of people like stationery and things like that. Bubble bath. So these things so the bubble bath is for a bath, obviously, but then that might trigger somebody to go for a bath. Like, okay, I'll go for a bath instead. And it just might remind them of something nice. A snuggly blanket or a cuddly toy. It might be something they've had for a long time. It could be an exercise where they go out and buy something specifically for the box. Favourite sweet treats. Photos. Photos are really powerful. People they love, people they care about. A happy memory. Colouring books for mindfulness. You can get these in abundance now. Elastic bands. Elastic bands can be really good. So put one around your wrist and just kind of pinging it when you get the urge. It can also be used as a form of grounding. Again, I am here, as long as it's not done in excess. Favourite cards, puzzle books. Maybe have a think about what you would have in your own self-soothe box. Think about some young people what do they like. This could be an exercise that you do in school. You could have a photo of yourself in your self-soothe box, just because it can just remind us who we are, and to be kind to ourselves. So yeah, perhaps have a think of what you would have in your self-soothe box. So let's get this. How we respond to distress, is important, but overall it has limited impact. We need to look at what is causing the distress. So, for example, if somebody is being bullied in school, they come to you, they say, I'm distressed, this is what's happening. Your response is important, but if the bullying is going to continue, the distress is going to continue. Or rather, if the young person, if there's no coping mechanisms in place, and things like that, what is causing the distress is what matters ultimately. As Vicki said earlier, this time and support and patience, it might feel a little bit frustrating. It might feel like you're not getting anywhere. But sometimes it can be a little bit like growing your hair. Like, you don't notice a change every day, but if you look at a picture 6 months apart, you'll see how much your hair's grown. Changes will happen. You just need time and patience and that ongoing support. We're going to move on to this one in a minute. The stress bucket is a really, really good way to unpick issues and think about the different issues. And if we've done all of this, it is still okay to enlist support from other services, and we don't even necessarily have to jump to, you know, like CAMS or mental health services. It may be that, you know, it's Childline or Samaritans or another service that supports young people, because it's really, really important for you not to take all of this on your own, and it's really, really important for the young person to have a couple of different options as to where to get support from.
Thanks, Louise. So Louise mentioned before about the stress bucket. The stress bucket is just a really good kind of metaphor, really, for what stress we have and how we manage with that stress. So I'm just about to show you a little video here. It's a couple of minutes video just describing the stress bucket, but it's an activity that you might be able to do with a young person, because it's very practical. You just need a piece of paper and a pen to be able to draw a bucket and talk it through with the young person. And it's quite an effective communication tool that you can use to just delve a little bit deeper and look beyond the self-harm behaviour, to look beyond what the causes of that distress is.
Hello and welcome to St Catherine's Head Talks. These videos are designed to help you add to your mental health toolkit. Over the weeks, we'll be looking at what anxiety is, how it affects us, and how we can learn coping skills. This week, we're going to look at an exercise called the stress bucket. Imagine we all have an imaginary bucket that carries our stress. Some people's buckets are larger than others, but nobody's bucket is empty and dry. Even on your best summer holiday, with your best people, having a lovely time, you still might have in the bottom of your stress bucket that you've got sunburn, for example. So we draw the bucket, writing all the stresses we have: friendship difficulties, grannies in hospital, assessment fortnight coming up, argued with your sister last night, homework due, etc. And eventually the bucket can spill over. This can be tears, anger, low mood, anxiety, and so on. When we feel like this, it's helpful to do the stress bucket exercise to identify why we're feeling like that. We need a way to reduce the distress levels. Some things we can't take out of the bucket, but we can reduce the level of stress by having taps. Some ways we can cope can reduce the stress level, but then they feed back into the bucket. For example, self-harm, truanting lessons, and so on. Other taps can help. For example, talking to friends or trusted adults, drawing or exercise. This week, why not notice the things that can be your taps and reduce your stress? Next week, we'll be looking at finding more coping strategies that can be good taps for you. Take care and remember, we can learn to manage our mental health. Goodbye.
So just before we move on to this, just take a minute to think about how you can use the stress bucket with young people that you might be working with, and how self-harm can be seen as a negative coping mechanism, and how you can illustrate that with young people that you work with. Okay, another thing that you might want to think about with young people who self-harm is putting a safety plan together. So, and it's something that you do together. It's something that you do to kind of say, how can we kind of ensure that you keep safe? What do you need to keep yourself safe? So in the safety plan, you might identify triggers what is it that triggers the self-harm. Note useful distraction strategies. What is it that you can do if you're feeling quite unregulated, if you're feeling as though you might be at risk of self-harm? What is it that you can do immediately as a distraction? Who to call for help? So who are you going to enlist? What you need to do to keep yourself safe. And that might be removing all medication, having all medication locked away. It might be removing razor blades. Just bearing in mind that we can never remove everything that we can use to self-harm, but it just might be to put something out of reach, gives long enough for the distraction strategies to kick in, and for the urges for the urges to kind of become a bit more under control. Who needs to be informed? Who is it that we need to tell that you're feeling unsafe at the moment? So here's an example of one we did earlier. So Louise, if you want to talk through this.
So we have got a blank copy of this at the end of this presentation if you want to print it out. So just quickly filled this out. So for example, if I was the example, so the warning signs that I might recognise that that things aren't going right. I might be feeling low in mood. I might be isolating myself. I might become more irritable. And I might not answer my phone. I might not answer messages or social media requests and things like that. Signs that others might notice. Now, this is really important because there's things about us that often we don't know or that we're just not aware of. So signs that other people might notice about me is that I'm not replying to messages. I might be making excuses as to not attend things or to not go places by just saying, oh, I am busy. That would be quite unusual for me because I will go places. I might be short and abrupt with people. I might be quite snappy. And I might be putting myself down. I might be saying things like, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm worthless and, things like that. Which would be out of context for me, really. So what can I do to keep me safe when these things are happening? As Vicki said, so removing objects that could potentially be harmful to me. And as Vicki said, we can't get rid of everything. But you might find as well that there may be particular items that are triggers for young people. So try and identify, a young person who's cutting themselves. They may use razors to cut themselves with, but will never use a kitchen knife. So identifying those particular triggers and then trying to remove those from the environment. Being with people where I can, so having company. That serves lots of different purposes. I wouldn't be able to go and self-harm, but then it's also a distraction. I might have some fun. I might find some understanding. Doing the things that I enjoy. So, for example, I enjoy writing and reading and listening to music and drawing. Making sure that I try and do those things or trying to find alternatives. So, for example, I like reading, but if I'm too tired to read, I might listen to an audiobook. And call a helpline if I need to. There's lots of helplines. There are lots of things out there, and they're good. They are good. So for young people, I think we found that their sort of preferred one to go to was Childline, but there are many different helplines for young people out there. Distractions. So as I've said, so for me it would be to do some writing, some drawing, watch my favourite film, or go for a walk. Who can I call? You'd have a couple of numbers on here, so I've just put Vicki as the example. I'm just making sure that number is there. We often don't need numbers now because they're stored in our phones, but just having it there is sort of concrete places I can go. Where can I go? In this case, I've used Vicki as the example. So, if I just need some time out, if I need some distraction, if I need some company, I might just give Vicki a ring and say, can I pop round? Or going for a walk in the woods because I like trees. And what makes me happy. So this ties in with the positive thing, things that keep us hopeful. So my cats, I've got 2 cats, playing and listening to music, drawing and writing. These things make me happy. Things to look forward to, people I love. Another thing about this safety plan as well, it looks quite simple and it needs to stay simple, because when those moments of crisis hit, we need something just clear cut, that this is what we do. These are the instructions. It doesn't need to be complicated. That's why it looks so simple.
Thanks, Louise. And I guess just to kind of point out that everybody's safety plan might look different. So this is Louise's safety plan, but if you're doing with a young person that you're working with, they might have completely different things written down here, because that's unique to different people. And also just, this can be folded up and put in your pocket. A young person can have this in the blazer pocket at all times, and they can just remind themselves what it is. And you might have a copy of it as well, so you can remind them, who do you need to call? What do you need to do now? So safety plans are really good, kind of just tangible things where there's a really clear plan that everybody understands.
So, staff resilience. So now this is about your well-being. So if we go back to the resilience framework, if we have a think about the resilience framework, that resilience framework and the 42 resilient moves can apply to anyone. So if I think today about, for coping, a resilient move that I've done today is being brave by recording this. So you can think about your own sort of resilient moves and how that can help you. Other things you can do. So checking in regularly with your safeguarding lead or your designated mental health lead. It's okay to ask for support. As you said earlier, you don't need to carry this on your own. Even if a young person has approached you, you still need that support. Access regular supervision, if that is available, that can be quite helpful and beneficial. Staff training is really good. So if you're watching this video, we would hope that this would instill a bit of confidence or a bit of hope or a bit of, this is okay, I can manage this. Debriefing after an incident is really, really important, because we can get caught up in it. Our own adrenaline can start. We just might need to bring ourselves down a little bit, grounding ourselves a little bit. Contribute to positive learning culture. So what we've been learning in this video will be the sort of positive learning culture. So if you think about the things we've addressed about like stigma and things like that, so contributing to that. So we've got a link here, and this is it's about practitioner resilience. It's a practitioner resilience webinar, and there's a series of videos by one of our colleagues in Boingboing, Gabrielle. So if you click on this link, it will take you to that series, and you can have a look at that. And then having a think about how you look after your own mental health, and not to be put off by the term mental health, because we all have mental health. How do you look after your own mental health and your own emotional well-being? What is it that you do? And you can look back at these things. These suggestions for the young people will also be relevant for you as well.
So we're just going to now spend a couple of minutes thinking about how supporting young people who self-harm fit into the whole school approach model. So I'm just going to ask you to stop, to pause at this slide and just jot down a few things about what your school can do to take a whole school approach to supporting young people who self-harm. Okay, so wondering what you've thought about there. How did you think about the curriculum and teaching? And maybe you thought about having self-harm and information about self-harm and self-care in your PHSE lessons. Maybe you thought about a supportive school culture and staff development and how staff can be supported, whether it be through supervision staff debriefs, and staff training and your staff development. Maybe you thought about how your school has policies and practices and a culture to particularly identify children and young people who are most marginalised and who therefore may be more at risk of self-harming. Maybe you've thought about how your mental health policy and how you might have mental health support within other policies that you have, such as anti-bullying, etc., wellbeing policies. And maybe kind of within leadership and management, you've thought about how to foster a really supportive and just a resilient culture, a resilient community for pupils and for staff within your school.
So we've just got some websites and other resources here. So again, this list isn't exhaustive, but these can either support you in supporting young people, offer you further information, or it could be something for the young person. So we've got our website, Boingboing, and we are we've said where we're from, but you'll find lots of information on the resilience framework and different tools and things like that. And then you've got the list of other different websites. So just going back to one of our slides at the beginning and just having a think about how confident you feel in supporting young people who self-harm. If you think about how your confidence was at the beginning of this video, and are you feeling any more confident now? Are you feeling around the same? Have a think about that. Yeah, we hope this has been helpful. So thank you for watching. If you do want any further information, you can contact either of us. So you've got Vicki Dunham, so Vicki at boingboing.org.uk, and you've got me, Louise Brinton-Clarke, Louise at boingboing.org.uk. So if you want any further information, any sort of signposting or anything like that, or just got any questions, just drop us an email and we'll get back to you when we can.
I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.